So you've heard about all these, exciting emerging agents, and of course the question is how do we get our hands on them? And the only way we have advances and access to these emerging agents is through the participation in clinical trials of the patients in the generations ahead of us. At Concord Haematology, our research unit is very much shares a philosophy of research across all of haematology in Australia, certainly at both at Concord and at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital. And we believe that quality, ethically sound clinical trials are a standard of care and are integral to the delivery of evidence-based medicine. And we're very keen to provide access to our patients to these emerging therapies through providing a diverse portfolio of such trials. And we want to be able to contribute independently to evidence-based medicine. Now, obviously, when you're making your decision about your treatment for your patient with myeloma, as Professors Ho and Demopoulos have already explained, the treatment decision is very much based around whether you're newly diagnosed or relapsed, whether you're symptomatic or asymptomatic, and the various prognostic markers, along with various features about yourself and your own fitness. Clearly, the physician in Australia is not the autocratic, cranky Dr. House, we like to think, but someone who works within the constraints of the Australian healthcare structure and within a multidisciplinary, peer-reviewed system. But always we're looking to see if there is any clinically appropriate trial available for our patients. Now, research has moved us away, as Professors Ho and Demopoulos have already shown us, from the blunderbuss chemotherapy approach. And we have now these smarter, targeted therapies, and we have this wealth of new therapies that we really struggle to try and work out how best to combine them, how to put them in what order. We have the immune system modulators that you've already heard about, the proteasome inhibitors, and the exciting new antibody therapies that are emerging in clinical trials. Now, we all get very frustrated about how long it takes us to access these new agents, and that's because we've got to do it right. We don't want a repeat of the thalidomide story with all the teratogenicity, all the birth defects that occurred in the late 60s. And preclinical research development on a drug will take at least 2 or 3 years in laboratory cell line testing and animal testing before it moves into the early phase clinical trials, where the safety of the drug, the deliverability of the new therapy is tested in ever so slightly increasing doses to determine that it is safe to give to humans. Once that safety has been determined and the ideal dose, which avoids too much toxicity, has been determined, trials will move into the second phase of therapy, trying to work out, does the drug actually work? Does this whole therapeutic program that we're proposing work against the myeloma? And what are the side effects of that agent? Once the drug has been shown to be working, then it will be tested in what we call the large phase 3, usually a randomized, controlled clinical trial involving hundreds of patients to compare that new therapeutic approach with the standard of care, what we are already currently using in clinic. Now, if standard of care is no treatment or observation, then the standard of care in that trial will be placebo or sugar pill. So it's only after phase 3 developments for most drugs in myeloma therapy that it gets released and approved by whichever government authority, whether it's the FDA, the Federal Drug Authority in the US, or the Therapeutic Goods Authority here in Australia. And then it's also very important, mindful of the thalidomide story, that there are what we call phase 4 trials, or at least post-market surveillance of the drug as it is applied across the thousands of patients who have myeloma internationally, to make sure that there are no unexpected long-term toxicities of that agent. Now, what is good clinical research? It's a trial that asks the right question. It asks the questions that are important to you, that reflect the community's needs and questions. It obviously has to be ethically justifiable and conducted in an ethical manner. And there is a very, very strict code, an international code called the Code of Good Clinical Practice that is applied to clinical research across the whole spectrum of medicine. And that the design of the trial must be designed so that the question that is asked can be reliably answered with minimal bias in the study. So a clinical trial is, in one sentence, a carefully designed study conducted under the Code of Good Clinical Practice that seeks to determine, under these controlled conditions, the safety and the effectiveness of a new drug or treatment method. And it's clinical research that allows the laboratory breakthroughs to be translated into clinical care. Now, why would you want to participate in clinical trials? Well, clearly the obvious thing for you as an individual patient is the potential direct benefit from that studied therapy to you. And it's been shown that patients who participate in trials, even when they're receiving the standard of care, actually tend to do better, probably because of greater adherence to the protocol and closer monitoring of the patient. Patients are also motivated to participate in trials to contribute to the advancement of medicine and scientific knowledge, and because it benefits the patients who will follow on from them and speed the development of effective therapies and also stop in its track the development of ineffective or toxic therapies. And also certainly a great motivator for us here at Concord Hospital is it enables us to access therapies that have already been proven in earlier phase studies, but are not yet TGA approved or available on our pharmaceutical benefit scheme. Why not participate in clinical trials? The question that the trial is asking might not be the right question for you. And so your doctor may not advise you to participate on that trial, or you may not choose to participate in it. And the direct risks of clinical trial participation must be acknowledged and must be recognised and weighed up against the potential benefits. It's certainly a lot easier to just have standard of care. And often for a lot of patients, particularly when they're newly diagnosed and can't even spell the word myeloma, it's often far too much to think about reading a 12-page consent document and learning about a very complex clinical trial. Certainly it's much more onerous for the patient and for the doctors. And always when you're participating in a clinical trial, it is appropriate to ask who really benefits from this study, and will I get potential access to this agent if I'm not actually on the agent if it's in a phase 3 clinical trial. And it's important that we're mindful of potential conflicts of interest, and so that way we can try and avoid them. The informed consent process is a very long process, and I always have my own mnemonic up there to remind myself that I go through all the important parts of informed consent, to explain to the patient the purpose of the study, the procedures involved, the processes involved in participating in the study, the risks and the potential benefits, the alternative treatment options, the fact that it is entirely voluntary from the moment they sign the consent form right through their entire participation in the study. They can pull out at any time, and indeed if their doctor feels that participating in the clinical trial is no longer in their best interests, the doctor will advise them to withdraw. There are always a lot of questions, and for that reason I find it very useful having my clinical trials nurse or my clinical data manager present on that informed consent process to add the supplementary procedural information that I may not know the fine details of, and it also gives them an opportunity to observe and identify specific patient issues. I think it's very important we counter the negative public perceptions that occur about clinical trial participation, and that clinical trial participants should be acknowledged and celebrated as the ultimate volunteers rather than ambivalently regarded. And it's important to recognise that awareness about clinical trials is not the same as understanding, and there is a lot of negative perception out there in the community about clinical research. I want to just now cover a couple of things that we're actually participating in. One is our own melphalan pharmacokinetic and pharmacodynamic study. Pharmacokinetics is the study of the drug and its distribution in the body, whereas pharmacodynamics is the study of the effect of that drug on your body. And we're worked out in 120 patients that one size, the standard dose of 200 milligrams per metre squared of melphalan, does not seem to be the right size for all, because we have identified a 5-fold range in drug levels of the melphalan in patients having a stem cell transplant. And importantly, we noted that the patients who got the above average exposure to melphalan, actually, although they had a bit more mucositis and mouth ulceration, they actually lived to longer, and we're proceeding on in another pharmacokinetic test dose study here at Concord and Prince Alfred in that. I want to introduce you all to ClinTrial Refer, and to encourage those of you who are interested in clinical research in myeloma to download this application that is free to anyone who wishes to download it from the Apple Store. It is an easy-to-navigate listing of the currently recruiting trials across New South Wales and the Australian Capital Territory, and the Haematology Victoria version of ClinTrial Refer will go live next month. And it provides data that's already publicly available in a much more easily and readily absorbed format, providing a very easy-to-navigate listing of the recruiting trials across New South Wales. And I want to point out the MM14 study that is perhaps one of the only ways to get access to pomalidomide currently in Australia. Is the Australian Leukemia Lymphoma Group led study where patients who have relapsed myeloma all start on 4 months of pomalidomide therapy, and then half of them will have no further steroid use in combination with their pomalidomide, and half of them will carry on with both pomalidomide and steroids, to see whether we can continue to benefit from the efficacy of pomalidomide without having to carry on with the toxicity of steroids. I'd like to just end there by reminding you that the clinical research units across Australia are really focused on trying to do the haematology research that really meets our community's needs. And I'd like to thank you very much for your time.